and then click that.
All right, gang.
Hello.
This is a very special afternoon.
It is. So I did try that little something, putting up a graphic like a few minutes out before we came in. I was trying to be all
intro
fancy.
Music, where you need like an intro music stream or something like that.
Yeah, like almost like the Jeopardy waiting music, maybe something like that.
Yeah, well, I don't think we have copyright to do that, but something similar would probably not be such a bad idea.
No, we could find something stock like that
we
could use. Hello, all.
Oh,
welcome to the special afternoon edition of Generational Change live stream. And yeah, I mean, when we decided that we wanted our interviews to be live, like, because when we first started out, I had scheduled recorded interviews and it wasn't, and Sophie's freaking out. But we decided we wanted to do our interviews live. Well, in order to do that, you have to accommodate the people you want to interview. So unfortunately, we can't always be at the same time. I mean, ideally we do. But anyway, we have to prioritize the, level of credentials of the people that want to speak with us. And this is pretty big. So
this one has credentials.
This is very credentially.
Yes.
I mean, if we, so as you guys saw, we will be speaking with Michael Mann, and he is a climate scientist. This is actually what he does.
Pretty serious business.
Very hardcore. And I was doing a little research on him, and he was the scientist back in 98. It was like 97 or 98 that put out the original chart that showed the direct correlation between man-made climate and how that climate impact and how that made the huge change. And it was called this hockey stick graph, which I looked at it. It doesn't really look anything like a hockey stick to me, so I don't understand it. But basically, it's this graph that shows historically climate pattern, and then this huge increase right around, us. So, well, probably closer to the Industrial Revolution. But anyway, so he's going to be on. We're going to talk with him, but we will.
It does make you wonder what may have been had he, had Gore won back in 2000, the impact, the 2 decades long impact that we could have had, setting the precedent for the environment at that time. And now we'll have the opportunity to speak with him on a multitude of different matters, but obviously, it goes without saying that we are in a climate war right now.
He always says that.
Yeah.
So, and he has a new book out, and that's what we're gonna start. I think that's what we'll probably start off talking about anyway, because he has a new book out. And one of the key points from what I've gathered is that this is not something that's going to be ascribed to us individuals. It really isn't. It is way bigger than that. And one of the big things that the establishment does, and the fossil fuel industry and the oligarchs, what they do is they put it on us so that we feel personally responsible. So we're running around and banning straws and recycling and doing all this stuff that we're trying to do, and it won't make a difference because the issue is way bigger than that.
No. And we do obviously have a couple of matters of business to get to, as we get started. And, I think our bootlicker of the week just kind of has to go first.
Okay. But here's something I wanted to ask you about that. Given the events of yesterday with said bootlicker, or the events of today or whatever that's going on, it's almost like we need a different graphic, because you heard about what he...
Yes, of course.
Okay. So do you want to start with that?
Yeah, we have to start with that, because it's just way too juicy not to talk about it.
It's the first one. Yeah. But you got to go to share screen again and pick it.
So I think you guys know who our bootlicker of the week is. It's just way too obvious who it could be. He really is just what you would call the ultimate bootlicker, because let's face it, Ted Cruz is... he could be the butt end of every joke in politics. I don't know if he's deliberately absent-minded or if it's on purpose. Whatever it is, it's really bad. And the fact that he was literally caught getting on an airplane and what appeared to be disguised. He had the glasses on, he had the big mask to cover his face, had his hair combed a certain way, but somebody knew that looked like Ted Cruz, and maybe they had recognized his family. Anything is possible, but there is no question that he is our bootlicker of the week. This guy, he's such a slime bag. He just can't get out of his own way.
Oh my God.
But I also think it's on purpose. I think that he really just doesn't. There's nothing redeemable about him.
No, he's horrible. He's absolutely horrible.
And when the way he's such a shapeshifter and pretends to be something that he isn't.
But I love that he just left town.
Yeah. Well, that's after he decided to literally lick the boots and the ass of big oil, the fossil fuel industry, making up excuses as to why the massive power outages all throughout Central Texas had nothing to do with climate change and with bad infrastructure due to fracking pipes.
No, do we want to talk about that they are the only state that's not on the national grid because they didn't want to have to pay for it?
Of course.
And so that they're basically their own privatized little nightmare of power that now they're wanting help?
Of course, that is what, again, Ted Cruz is, he just has a history of being horrifically bad. And that, of course, starts with, you could go all the way back to when he, I think he got elected to the Senate if his election's going to be in 2 years. So then his first election to the Senate was in 2012, I believe. I'd have to look that up to be sure. But, I remember him coming out against Hurricane Sandy relief. And I was in Hurricane Sandy.
Well, it's interesting to me how and I don't like to draw party lines, but generally this does tend to be a GOP thing that every man for himself. Unless it's me, then we need help. And and they're so blatant about it. And it's just so how do people, I don't understand how people don't get that.
And I just wonder at this point if people are ultimately going to be getting tired of it, I think is the question. Because Ted Cruz is a poster child for what is wrong. He's a total phony conservative. He's not real. He doesn't actually practice fiscal conservatism. He doesn't actually believe in anything. Conservatism also involves conserving the environment. And all he seems to do is just, like I said, lick the boots and the butt of, the fossil fuel industry. And there's no doubt that he got his talking points from them, basically suggesting that, and as did Governor Abbott.
Yeah.
And of course, it's opening up the lane wide open for Beto O'Rourke to run for governor, which he's going to do.
Well, he's looking good. So it'll be the guy who maybe cares about the climate, but he's coming to take your guns. So that
is what the GOP is going to run on.
Yeah.
That is what they're going to do.
But they're looking horrible. And can I just point out as a side note, a little anecdotal thing about when I lived in Texas? When I lived in Texas, I remember, and I actually was part of the election that did not vote for W for governor. But Greg Abbott, I voted against him for attorney general back then. Like I always thought he was a POS. Well, I mean, they've had a series of them there. I mean, unless Ann Richards could come back somehow, they're toast there.
Yeah, it's a state that unfortunately, you've got, I mean, it's still red. There's no question. And I just don't know if, when Greg Abbott, what's interesting is that when Beto ran against Ted Cruz back in 2018, that election was pretty close. Ted ended up, eking it out by 3 points. But Greg Abbott was also up for re-election for governor at the time, and he ended up winning his re-election by about, I think, 13 or 14 points. So this idea that they're going to take the governorship away from Greg Abbott, I'm not sure I just don't see it. But I do think that Ted Cruz, let's put it this way. Whether Ted Cruz is beaten by the Democrats or eventually gets a primary challenge from somebody like Dan Crenshaw, I do think it's very likely that he's going to go. He's just such an incompetent buffoon, and he makes the party look really, really bad. But he also wants to lead the party. So that's what makes it even funnier. It's not like he's just some, behind the scenes guy who just really sticks his foot in his mouth all the time. No, Ted Cruz thinks he's going to run for president again. And that's the joke. That is funny.
Oh, yeah.
But good enough, because they already released a poll of the
GOP.
Now, they already released a poll of the GOP indicating, who ultimately is going to run for president in 2024. And Trump leads the field by a unconscionable margin. He has like over almost 60% of the vote. And the next closest person is Mike Pence with like 10, 12% or something like that. So,
good. So the plot thickens. If he leaves, he's storming off and forming his own little party. Yeah. That can only help us. So.
No, I agree. Because again, the progressives, unfortunately, are not willing to take chances the way that they should. What do you want to do?
Well, I was going to go to news and muse because you're just not, and we need to sort of move
Speed it
along.
up?
Well, I feel like, if I wasn't here, you would just sit there pontificating about
What's wrong
Ted
with
Cruz,
pontificating for a few minutes?
about Ted Cruz? Because he's just, all right,
we got
gotta
16
move on.
minutes.
I know, but don't
Jen
you
doesn't
wanna
think
cover
I
this
move
other
fast
stuff?
enough. So,
No, I think you get stuck in the muck.
well, I'm going to continue what I'm saying because part of News and Amuse is
Do we have to go
segment.
back to Ted Cruz?
We do, because
wanna
Ted
go-
Cruz is actually part of this conversation. Because one of the most important things about the news this week is about clean energy. Now, you have Senator Cruz and Governor Abbott coming out basically saying that the reason why the power grid failed in Texas is because of renewable energy. And what I thought was even more beautiful that we had retweeted there was a gentleman up in Iowa, and it's a lot colder in Iowa than it is in Texas. And they showed in -5 degrees
Exactly.
the wind turbines churning.
They use wind turbines in Russia and like Finland and Norway, and I know they do in Denmark and places that get infinitely colder than Texas.
Hey Mal, thank you for the very lovely comment.
you.
Appreciate that. So again, they are just trying to delay the inevitable, which is we are moving to a clean energy grid. That's the bottom line. That's what's coming. And it's just a question of how quickly we can get there without these bought off representatives. Obviously, the GOP is worse than the Democrats, but the Democrats are still pretty bad themselves. There is no pushback on this point. If it was, maybe President Biden would come out and say something, but he isn't saying anything.
No.
There is no question that wind, solar, geothermal, hydro.
Yeah.
And
by the way, I believe there's wind turbines in Siberia.
Yeah.
Although I'm going to have to check with my new friend from Siberia on that. But yeah, the fact even the thought that somebody would say that the windmills don't work in the cold is just.
Well, they're running out of excuses, and obviously, and we even said that the Ted Cruz, Greg Abbott talking points are brought to you by the fossil fuel industry. Because they have nothing else. Everyone is eventually getting it. And there's a couple of very conservative communities in Central and West Texas that essentially run their entire community on renewable energy.
So
it's just this argument's dead. It's just dead in the water now.
Enough already.
So that's, and again, we don't want to belabor the point too much because we'll talk about this with Michael when he comes on.
That's the whole point of today is we're going to really break down who's responsible for what.
Now, one of the other important talking points that we want to talk about, and it crosses two particular topics. One is Biden's town hall, which was a disaster, as most of you probably know.
I didn't watch that.
I unfortunately did.
That's your job.
Well, that's my job. We did go on Tuesday to a Fight for 15 rally because even in the state of Florida, which voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump and for a $15 minimum wage, is now being saddled by the Florida GOP, led by State Senator Jeff Brandes out in St. Petersburg, right on the west coast of Florida.
He's a winner.
He is trying to put limitations on who can actually make $15 an hour. And as you might imagine, it's pretty much the people who need $15 an hour wage the most.
He categorizes them as hard to hires. So people that are hard to hire don't deserve the minimum wage. And he's couching it, though, as, well, because they're hard to hire, if people are forced to pay the minimum wage, they'll never get jobs, as if he's doing it to help them. So in other words, we're supposed to believe that the Florida Republican senator from St. Petersburg is most concerned about the young and the formerly incarcerated.
Yep.
Where that is his biggest concern, is the young and formerly incarcerated. And so he wants to make sure that they're able to be hired, and they won't get hired at a $15 minimum wage. It's so kind of him, really.
And like I said, the people that need the $15 minimum wage the most are the people who are being targeted by this ridiculous state Senate bill.
Right.
Now, do I think it's going to pass? Look, normally I would say no, but with Governor DeSantis, I don't put anything past
I don't
him.
know. I think that even most Florida GOP legislators wouldn't do that. I really don't think that they would. That passed with 61% of the vote in this state. So not a lot of people are going to want to go up against what the majority of their constituents wanted. I don't know. I don't think that that's going to take. It's disgusting that it was even thought of, but I don't think it's going to I don't think that's going to go anywhere. That's my
but even the fact that it's even putting it out there, economic anxiety is one of the biggest stress killers that you have in society. There's no question. That's why the talk about UBI is becoming so popular. It's why modern monetary theory is so popular. As a matter of fact, you had Ayanna Pressley, who just came out today in support of a federal jobs guarantee, which means she's probably been reading The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton about modern monetary theory. That's great news. So when I hear people talk about how, oh, these progressives, they're not really making a difference in Congress. Yes, they are. Yeah,
well, but we do need to talk about the other issue. Yesterday wasn't so much about the state, because we did pass a $15 minimum wage in the state of Florida. We did. And as of right now, there is one, and it starts happening. So that's good. But the issue is we don't have a federal minimum wage. So right now, the federal minimum wage is what, $7.25 or something? Like, it hasn't gone up since 2009.
Well, it's a poverty wage.
It's well below. I mean, 2009 was the last time that there was a federal minimum wage increase. That's just, it's absurd.
It is.
So regardless of what's happening in Florida, we care about people in other places, and people need a living wage. As it is, what they're saying is a minimum wage really isn't a living wage in most places in this country. But nonetheless, so we're still fighting for the federal fight for 15. That's the point.
And it's unfortunately a fight that's going to continue, and it's only going to get harder, which is a good segue, because at Biden's town hall, he's moonwalking away from the $15 minimum wage, among other things.
That was the big impetus for this caravan yesterday, or on Tuesday, rather.
So but in a way, it's a blessing in disguise, because if Bernie was president, I can see the argument being made that they all would have coalesced against him. They would have made it impossible for him to get anything done. And everyone would have just said, well, this is just how it works in DC. But without the looming pressure that would be put on Bernie from the establishment, now the establishment is in power, and it's the worst establishment, which is the Democratic establishment, because they're usually able to get away with murder, no pun intended. And the fact that they are now moonwalking away from the $15 minimum wage, it's making Biden look really, really bad.
Again, I said from the beginning that I do believe that the establishment Dems in Congress prefer having a Republican in the White House. So they don't care whether the choices that he makes create a Republican takeover in 2 years. Like, that's not their concern. That works fine for them.
You have Speaker Pelosi coming out saying, I want a strong Republican Party.
Yeah. Well, and you had Schumer wanting to share power with Mitch McConnell. They're indifferent about who's in the White House. Like, it doesn't matter to them. I think it makes their life easier for it to be Republican, because then they don't look ridiculous. So now they're going to look ridiculous, but they'll have 2 years and then they'll be back out of power. I mean, that's what they're working on. So that doesn't
mean, I mean, listen, Reverend Warnock, John Ossoff, millions upon millions of people around the country, they wanted to win the Georgia Senate races. There's no question that they did.
And they were promised a $2,000 check for that.
But the truth is, the Democratic establishment, the real higher-ups within the party, they did not want to win that race. No way. Why would they? And that's, again, I know that Biden made that promise, but again,
well, they all did. They all made that promise.
But I think that part of the reason you make a promise like that is because they truly believe they were not going to win the race.
Well, but I think that when it comes to the $15 minimum wage, to me, and this is something that I want people to understand very, very clearly, you cannot think of the Democratic Party as the Labor Party. They're not a labor party. There's no labor party in the world that wouldn't fight for a $15 minimum wage. So if we can't get a $15 minimum wage when we have Democrat executive, Democrat legislative branch, and we still can't get that, it's time for the people that are in the party to recognize that you are not members of a labor party anymore. We are not. We are members of another corporate party. We're working on that. We're trying to fix that. But please recognize that this is not the party of the people.
It hasn't been the party of the people.
$15 minimum wage.
Has been the party of the people for a very long time.
Yes, but this is blatant. This is blatant. We were offered this, and now we're not getting this.
And the other thing that Biden mentioned in his town hall, which is really gotten people up in arms, is the fact that he is not willing to cancel student debt. None of it.
And he could do it so easily.
He could. And, we put out a tweet the other day, which has gotten a lot of traction, which is about the fact that, if Bernie was president, he would have canceled the student debt. And there's a lot of, it's overwhelmingly popular, but the people who are the dissenters against it, who don't think canceling student debt is a good thing.
Well, we know who that is.
The most far right people you could possibly imagine are who talk like this, who don't, first of all, and this is the thing that I want to talk about because this is what I do for a living, which is I work in college athletics. And I can assure you that the reason why college and universities are as expensive as they are is because there is a administrative bureaucracy that exists within these institutions now. And there are dozens of people, in some instances in schools that have as few as 1,500 to 2,000 students, that are making $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 a year. And with all due respect, they don't do anything. They bring absolutely no value whatsoever to the institution. It's all about building the next research building, or God knows what else they're involved in. This is not about people getting a better education. No one should be paying $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year to go to college.
But they don't want it. But if they stop that, then their rich friends, the bankers, we're going to have a situation here for a second.
Hang on a minute.
Their rich friends, the bankers, won't be making their profits off of us.
Hang on, Lou. I think Jen needs to step out for a minute. So, Continuing what I was mentioning is that, so ostensibly what ends up happening is you have these schools, and we talked about this the other day with Isaiah James, in that they'll always give you $200,000 in student loans because that's a cottage industry. But the thing that they're also not telling you is that very much like mortgage-backed securities, they do the same thing with student loans. So this is not only a administrative bureaucracy, there's also a Wall Street commodity interest that is involved with student loan debt. It makes over, I think it's like $1 trillion or like 1.25 trillion. It's something it's an
it's
insane,
for all their friends.
Insane amount
it's
of
the
money.
Friends and family of the Bidens and their friends.
And it's all about leeching off of the most vulnerable. I don't want to hear this nonsense from these people who want to pontificate about whether or not the value of getting an education actually matters in the United States from the perspective of, well, you took out those loans and you have to pay for them. It shouldn't be that expensive to begin with. Tuition-free public college existed in the United States, in New York and California for decades. But then Ronald Reagan happened, and the rest is history. And we've been playing that game for 40 plus years now. So I only wish more people had longer term memories. But the truth is, we've got a lot of topics to talk about. And, obviously from a news perspective, we've covered a lot of ground. But perhaps one of the most, if not the most important topic that we have to be talking about today that isn't getting nearly enough attention is the issue of climate change. It's easy to not make it a central focus now because Trump is not in the White House. And I've always said that the worst part about Trump's presidency is how he handled the environment. But that doesn't mean that Biden is doing a much better job. And considering the fact that he is now not pulling our troops completely out of Yemen, he is not banning fracking, and he is not supporting the policies that need to be supported in order to push us towards a Green New Deal, my opinion, a clean energy jobs infrastructure bill is one of the best ways to make the Green New Deal happen. So now we are in what is known as a climate war. And that is the name of the new book where we're about to bring into the studio Michael E. Mann.
Okay, I have an introduction though here.
So
I mean,
Jen,
it's
let
not
Jen
like
do the
fancy
wonderful
or
introduction.
anything, but
no,
okay.
It's a good one.
Okay, well, so Michael Mann is the director of the Earth System Science Center at Penn State University. He has authored more than 180 publications and 5 books. And I mentioned everybody before that this was the gentleman with the hockey stick graph, which I still, for the life of me, do not see the hockey stick in the graph. Well, but I'm not a hockey fan, so I digress. And so we are going to talk about basically climate crisis. This is an expert on this, and we'll talk a little bit about his new book. So let's say hi. We're tech. We're not the most techie people here. We're working on it.
We got him.
We got it.
Hey, bye.
Hey, guys. Hey, great to be with you.
Hi. Thank you so much for coming.
There it is. There's the hockey stick right above his right shoulder.
Yeah, but I don't see the hockey stick.
I actually have a real hockey stick if you want to see it. But I'd have
how
to
does
get
that?
up.
You'll have to explain to me why it's seen as a hockey stick. It's like one of those prisms or those 3Ds where I'm just not seeing it.
Well, it's just simply the fact that if you look at the last 1,000 years and what we did with the hockey stick graph, which is now more than 2 decades old, believe it or not, was to use various lines of evidence like tree rings and corals and ice cores to extend the temperature record of the Earth back in time, since we only have about a century and a half of widespread thermometer measurements, historical measurements. So we wanted to extend that record farther back. And if you look at what it reveals, you see sort of this pretty mild, long-term, gentle cooling trend from 1,000 years ago into the depths of the Little Ice Age. That's the handle, and then the abrupt warming of the past century and a half, if you like. That's the blade. So it just sort of looks like it's like an L, a tilted.
Okay, that I can see. I mean, you can definitely see where we come into the picture and have to ruin everything.
Well, there you are.
So one of the things, and I'll admit I haven't read this, but one of the things that I saw in reading about this was this idea that the evildoers are basically changing the narrative around to put the onus on individuals. And that's one of the ways in which we're sort of running around chasing our tail instead of addressing what the real issue is. So I thought that, like, could you explain like how that has operated, you know, in terms of the messaging and what they're doing?
Sure thing. I want to make sure I got both your names. So Jen and
Peter.
Peter, right. Got it. So yeah, happy to do that. So sort of the old climate war, as it were, was this assault by fossil fuel interests and conservative interest groups, front groups, talking heads hired by them, conservative media outlets, what I call the inactivists, the forces of inaction. It was this effort to literally try to discredit the scientific case for concern about human-caused climate change. And I found myself at the center of that as a young physicist. Started out in math and physics, went off to graduate school to study physics, then got into climate modeling, the physics of climate modeling. And, you know, I didn't envision that as a career path that would place me at the center of the most contentious issue we've ever faced societally. But because of that hockey stick graph that we ended up publishing back in 1998, I did find myself in the center of that old climate war. And I literally was attacked on the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal. I had congressmen and senators trying to subpoena my personal records, my emails. Basically, the full weight of this denial machine was focused on me. And as a result, I ultimately came to embrace the opportunity that gave me to try to inform this conversation. So what's happened is, as you guys know, the impacts of climate change, look, arguably, we're watching them play out right now. You know, we can have a more nuanced conversation about precisely what's happening in Texas. Some evidence that we might expect these sort of pieces of the polar vortex to sort of break off and drift south like they have this winter here in the US and in Europe as well. There's some evidence that suggests that climate change may actually make those sorts of events more frequent. And so we can't, you know, we see the impacts of climate change play out in real time now in the form of devastating extreme weather events. And so those same forces of inaction, they can't deny that climate change is happening anymore, but they still want to keep us addicted to fossil fuels, right? So they've turned to this new array of tactics, no longer so much denial, but deflection, division, and even despair and doom mongering. Hey, if they can convince us it's too late to do anything about the problem, that potentially leads us down the same path of inaction. And so we can certainly unpack that, but that's basically the new climate war. These insidious new tactics that they're using, you know, because look, they don't care about the path we take. They just care about the destination. They want us disengaged. And if, you know, they can't do that through denial anymore, they're going to turn to these other insidious efforts to disengage us.
I think it was perfect timing for you to come on the show. I think Governor Abbott and Senator Cruz's comments on national media is, I mean, it's direct corporate talking points from the fossil fuel industry. It's so transparently obvious at this point. Do you think that a lot of people are starting to get hip to what's going on?
Yeah, and, you know, we could probably, you know, maybe it would be nice to hear from Ted Cruz, but I hear he's vacationing off in Vancouver.
He's in Cancun.
I
Yeah.
heard. I don't know if it's been confirmed yet, but he apparently jumped on a plane back to Houston pretty fast.
You can't make this stuff up, can you, folks?
You know what? Honestly, is he absent-minded?
We've got to let Ted Cruz go.
Yeah, is he absent-minded on purpose or by accident?
No,
I can't decide.
He's a douche. You have to let it go.
Well, let me put it this way. Ted Cruz was a national debate champion when he was an undergraduate at Princeton.
Yep.
So, look, to be saying the things that he says, you either have to be dumb or you have to be amoral and malicious. Well, he's not dumb.
No.
Nope.
So there you go.
Oh,
yeah. So it's sort of right out of the new climate war. What you're seeing right now, Republicans in Texas are now trying to blame renewable energy. It's the Green New Deal and AOC that are responsible for this, when in fact the failure was in their fossil fuel infrastructure. It was natural gas. And it's because of their policies, because of Texas Republicans' belief that they have to be isolated from the rest of the country. They resist any sort of regulation and interstate, in this case, interstate commerce. And so because of their policies, there's no natural gas coming into the state. But the failure wasn't actually in the renewable energy infrastructure. It overperformed. It met its commitments and its expectations. It was actually the failure of their natural gas supply. And so they want a classic new climate war tactic. They want to deflect attention from that. And so now they're attacking, it's the wind turbines because some of them froze. Anything to distract us from the real problem, which ironically, this event really drives home, both the impacts of climate change and the danger of our continued reliance on fossil fuel infrastructure.
Yeah.
I do think that when you see, obviously a new administration come in, as I was just mentioning before you came live, a lot of people were paying attention. Listen, I understand that people couldn't stand Trump's rhetoric, but what matters to me most is policy above everything else. And his policy on the environment was unforgivable. That's the best way I can describe it. I know that Biden obviously will do a couple of good things. Getting us back into the Paris Climate Accord obviously matters. Potentially the Iran nuclear deal, but right now that's not looking too good. I think that there's sort of like this, there's a necessary scenario here where there has to be immense public pressure put on Joe, because I do think that, look, you never know what's going to happen, but I think the likelihood that he'll respond in kind more so than anything, Trump was ever going to do is much more likely. I think that there are just way too many red flags right now, and I don't think anybody can rest on their laurels. And I hear people say, well, he's only been in office for a month. My attitude is the guy's got until May 1st. He's got 100 days to basically make an impact. That's how long, it's an unwritten rule, but that's basically how long you have a mandate for. If he does not take dramatic action on the environment, I'm very concerned about where we could be going. What are your thoughts on that and how we, ultimately can enact influence at that level? Because we do have elected representatives now, as you know, like AOC and others, who are willing to fight for the climate issue that we must do right now.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. You make some really good points there, and we do absolutely have to continue to put pressure, even on those who we think are on our side or on the right side of this issue, because if we don't continue to exert that pressure, they're going to give in to the opposing pressure from the fossil fuel industry and their lobby. And, there is a lot of pressure coming from them. And so we need to not only oppose that, but exceed the pressure that they are putting on our politicians to not act on the problem. I'm a little more optimistic, I have to say, when it comes to what Joe Biden has done thus far. You have to recognize, I think, a couple things here. As you alluded to, we really need climate legislation. No question about that. But the president alone obviously can't pass legislation. He can, write it and send it on to the House and the Senate, but it has to pass the House and the Senate. And we are quite fortunate, in my view, thanks to the efforts in Georgia, particularly the African American community and African American women who came out, and they gave us the Senate. They gave us, it was, we would have had Majority Leader Mitch McConnell still, if not for their efforts. And Mitch McConnell would never bring a climate bill to the floor. So we couldn't have seen climate legislation in the scenario where Republicans had retained the Senate. But now we're in a very closely divided 50-50 with the tie-breaking vote by Kamala Harris. And that probably is, that's going to make it difficult, other than through reconciliation with 50 votes and the tie-breaking vote. You can pass certain things through reconciliation, and Democrats are talking about doing that to some extent on climate. But for the sort of comprehensive climate legislation we'd like to see, it's going to be difficult to get something like AOC and Ed Markey's Green New Deal through this Senate. But I do actually think that we can get some climate legislation accomplished over the next 2 years while we work, hopefully, to give Democrats a larger majority 2 years from now, so that we can see bolder legislation passed Congress. The challenge is to get something meaningful passed now to complement what Biden is doing through executive actions. And here's where I'm in particular, where I'm more optimistic, Peter, than you are on where we are and where we're headed. We did see the boldest actions ever by a president put forward by Joe Biden a few weeks ago in the form of these comprehensive executive actions that I would argue go about as far as a chief executive can go in implementing something like a Green New Deal without a legislative component, right? Because without legislation, it's very difficult to get subsidies for renewable energy, stimulus, and carbon pricing, and all these other things that we need. And so I think it went about as far as you could possibly go. And the most important thing of all was signaling to the world through his actions across the government, appointing climate savvy, policy people to every single, agency and department, every cabinet level position, incorporating climate now into all of the agencies, which is something we haven't done before. In the past, we've thought of climate policy as well as DOE and EPA. But what they're doing, and it's in part because of Obama administration folks who talked to the incoming Biden team and said, look, if we had had the opportunity, here's what we would have liked to do. And so Biden is sort of doing what they said they would like to do. I think he's going pretty far. I think he's signaling to the world that we're serious, that we want to lead again. And you talked about the first 100 days, through May 1st. Well, on Earth Day, April 22nd, Biden is holding this international summit, which I think is really important because we don't want to wait until November for the COP26 conference, the next international climate meeting. If we arrive there and the various countries haven't done the hard work of preparing meaningful, commitments, because we've got to ratchet up those Paris commitments. They're not enough. We've got to go well beyond our initial Paris commitments. And in November in Glasgow, we have to have the nations of the world agree to do that. And by having this summit in April, it's sort of like a midterm to make sure that everybody's sort of doing the right thing, doing the work. So as you can see, I'm more optimistic about where we are and where we're headed. But let's not kid ourselves. We still have a monumental task ahead of us, and there is great urgency in acting immediately. So we have to continue to put that pressure, even on those we might think of as our friends, politicians we might think of as our friends, because they too are ultimately, they're vulnerable to political pressure.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you sound like you're satisfied with the Biden appointment picks.
Well, I want to see more, but, yeah.
Okay, and then the other question I have for you, and this is sort of a science geek question, and this is where I hope it's not like one of those things for me that no matter how many times people explain it, I have to accept I'm never going to understand it, but I'm hoping that you can explain to me the thing with when you're paying for carbon emissions and how that works. And because that to me seems like something you were talking about as real attainable legislation and something we could have. And you got to do it, like dumb it down for me.
Absolutely. So, so the bottom line is we've got to level the playing field, right? Because right now, fossil fuel energy is doing this damage to the planet. And, in the marketplace, that cost isn't represented. If there isn't some sort of price on carbon, then polluters pay no penalty for dumping their pollution into our atmosphere for free, as my good friend Bill McKibben has described it. I think that's how to think of it. And so we need to make sure that stops. And, Peter, you mentioned earlier on sort of banning fracking, and, that's part there. I like to think of it in terms of two things, two independent sort of paths that we have to take at the same time. There are what we call demand side measures. We want to reduce demand for fossil fuels, and you could do that through subsidies for renewable energy. You can do that through a price on carbon. So you level the playing field so that renewable energy gets to compete fairly. Renewable energy that isn't destroying the planet gets to at least compete fairly with fossil fuel energy. So that's sort of the demand side. The supply side is important too. Banning new pipelines, banning new fossil fuel infrastructure. And it's there in particular where you've seen a lot of activism, because those sorts of, pipeline protests, and they're visible, they garner media attention. So they're important opportunities for sort of commanding the attention of the public, but they also make a difference. They reduce supply. If we stop subsidizing pipelines, if we no longer allow drilling on public lands, which Biden is going to now block, and he's going to block the Keystone XL pipeline. So Biden is doing some of the right things there. When it comes to banning fracking, for example, this is something that we talk about a lot because I'm here in Pennsylvania, which is sort of fracking central, right? It's the Marcellus Shale. There is a vigorous sort of political debate about natural gas in this state. Ultimately, where I come down is that a fossil fuel, to those who say, well, natural gas can be the bridge to a fossil fuel free future. No, it's a bridge to nowhere. The solution to a problem created by fossil fuels can't be more fossil fuels, right? I mean, it's just that simple. So how do we phase out natural gas? And what I would say is Biden does favor the sort of market mechanisms, carbon pricing, subsidies for renewables, things that make natural gas increasingly non-competitive, rather than an outright ban, which, it's you choose your weapons, and he, seeks to take a somewhat more conservative approach. But here's the example I would give. Look at what's happened to coal over the last 4 years. Coal has undergone a death spiral. Is that because of Donald Trump's war on coal? No, it's because the market is just moving in a direction where it's no longer competitive. We need to accelerate those processes, not just with coal, but with natural gas and petroleum oil. And so, we have to use every tool in the toolbox is sort of where I'm coming from.
Okay, so does that include nuclear?
What was it? Michael Shellenberger? Was that his name?
Shellenberger? Oh my God! One of my very first podcast guests came on and talked about nuclear, and some people see it as a bridge.
Mike, I believe that's his name, Michael Shellenberger. Does that ring a bell?
Unfortunately, it does.
Unfortunately,
this is why we have different
all right. So we got it. All right, that's why it's all about it's a necessary conversation. Now, apparently, there's a new form of nuclear energy that is supposedly being perfected that doesn't involve.
He probably knows. He could probably write a dissertation on that.
Not quite, but I do know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yes. So there is this belief that we can't actually move to a complete clean energy grid for at least, who knows, 2 decades, whatever they're going to say, between solar, wind, geothermal, hydro, and biofuel. So the idea is that you got to have a bridge, and the bridge cannot be natural gas and coal. Could it be nuclear energy?
Yeah, so it's a fair question. And, the problem is these conversations are fraught because they're difficult issues to begin with, right? Just in a neutral environment, there are a lot of considerations, there are pros and cons, because obviously there's risk with nuclear energy. And so you're balancing risk. We're balancing the risk of the proliferation risks, nuclear proliferation risks, and environmental contamination risks of nuclear, with the climate risk of not transitioning off fossil fuels, right? So the question then comes down to, so it's a difficult conversation in the first place. And then what makes it even more complicated is there are, actors in this space who have an agenda and are not really coming to the conversation from a place of good faith. They've got an agenda, a hidden agenda in many cases. They are, in fact, advocates, say, for some of those interests, be it fossil fuel industry or the nuclear industry. And typically, it's paired with a unjustified pessimism about our ability to scale up the obvious solutions. And let me emphasize that, I'll sort of contrast my book, The New Climate War, which just came out, which sort of where I provide a vision of the path forward, where we do scale up renewable energy and we can meet projected energy demand by scaling up existing technology. And I'll contrast that with Bill Gates' new book, where he is sort of he expresses undue pessimism about our ability to scale up renewable energy. He's even said before that we need a miracle. To solve this problem, we need a miracle. We don't need a miracle. Look up in the sky. We've got the sun, the wind at our backs, geothermal, all the things that you mentioned earlier, Peter. We have solutions, clean energy solutions that don't come with those risks. And it's simply a matter of providing the incentives so that we scale those technologies up. And too often we hear, no, there's no way, that we can do that. But hey, we could shoot particles into the stratosphere to block out some of the sunlight to try to cool the Earth back down. Or we could massively scale up new generation, new nuclear energy that doesn't even exist yet. So there is this contrast between an undue pessimism about the ready solution that we have, renewable energy, and this techno-optimism when it comes to potentially dangerous technologies that in many cases don't even exist yet. And we can't explain that sort of paired, that discrepancy between the pessimism and the optimism without understanding that in some cases there is an ideological frame that they're working out of.
And let's be clear, you don't have your agenda is just trying to do the right thing, like what that is, right? Like you're not promoting any specific method.
Other than the fact that I'm massively invested in carbon credits. No, I'm just kidding. These claims have been made. These claims have been made before that we climate scientists are going to get rich off of this because of all the carbon credits that that we're
talking about. You went into this is the money you were in.
Oh, no.
I could show you. I've got a whole collection of carbon credits right over here that I could. No, I mean,
bookshelf. You got a great book.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'd like to think that most of us are we care about the work that we do. We got into this really for the science because we love doing science. Many of us really realized that the science that we were doing actually had some really important real world implications. And we feel some responsibility to try to inform, the world about this threat. And we recognize that there are others who are trying to contaminate our public discourse, both our atmosphere and our public discourse. And so I feel like we play an important role in pushing back against the misinformation and the disinformation.
Michael, that is a fantastic segue because, as you probably know, Jen ran for the United States Congress against Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And one of the big issues, I did
not know that. That's okay.
That's why we even have any platform is we were coming off of that campaign and decided to use this platform. Basically, we're trying to transform politics into service.
What district is that? That's
third. It's the one it's the suburban region that is directly between Fort Lauderdale and Miami.
Yeah,
and it's think of
Broward County.
Yeah,
know it well. My brother used to live in Fort Lauderdale, and my parents in Boca Raton, so I know the area.
I was right for 7 years, so
we are coming off of that. That's where we are.
Got it.
So one of the things that you just brought up, which I think is a fantastic segue, is that there are organizations that are in the climate movement that, let's just say, they're not everything that they're cooped up to.
Sierra Club.
So we have a couple of them. I would say the two most in particular that I took exception with is definitely the Sierra Club and the League of Conservation Voters. And these are two organizations that not only didn't support Jen, but I also understand in politics, you generally don't get involved with certain races if you simply don't believe that a candidate is viable, even if you believe what they're fighting for, because the difference between one who is taking the fossil fuel money and isn't it should pretty much be the deciding factor. But these two organizations decided to back Wasserman Schultz, who has a horrifically bad record when it comes to the environment, so much so that she voted to fast track the TPP. And anybody who knows what that would do environmentally would be disastrous. So can you speak to knowing how to sort of navigate this field of which climate organizations are truly fighting for the cause? Because there are a couple of great ones down here in Florida. As you said, you have family who lives in this area.
Yeah.
Bull Sugar is a phenomenal organization that's up in sort of like the central region of the state, right around Port St. Lucie and Fort Pearson, that region. And then we also have the Florida Environmental Caucus, which—
And we have a Sunrise Movement.
And we have the Sunrise Movement. Now, the National Sunrise Movement did not endorse Jen, but the Miami chapter, which is one of the biggest in the country, did endorse her. So there are some really good groups that are out there, but there are also some pretenders. And I think it's important, and would love for you to speak on this. How do you tell the difference between ones that are absolutely for the cause and ones that are, let's just say, playing the political game, if you will?
Yeah, it's difficult. There's no question. And, Sierra Club is an interesting one in particular because historically they were perhaps the most conservative of the environmental organizations. And, it was about saving the Sierra. So they had a pretty narrow mission. It was, and I will give some credit to Michael Brune. Under his leadership, they've moved in the right direction. There's only so much that one, president can do with an environmental organization, because there's a legacy. There's a legacy of who are the members historically, where do they get the support from. So I would want to say that I'll confess sort of conflict of interest here. I'm personal friends with Michael Brune, and I do think that he's done a good job in getting them more involved on issues like climate change. So there's been a lot of movement. Does that mean they're entirely where we might want them to be? No. And in my book, I actually take issue with an article in Sierra Magazine that I felt played into one of the frames that I've been arguing is unhelpful. This idea that the solution to the problem is almost exclusively individual behavioral change. It puts it on us rather than the polluters. And of course, there's only so much we can do as individuals. We have to work within the system that's there. And if that system has the wrong incentives, then we're sort of stuck. If we can't get renewable energy because our providers don't give us that option, we're sort of stuck. And so, there in that case, the Sierra Club had written an article which sort of played into that that idea that it's really about individual behavior and not so much about policy change. And I took issue with that. And I mentioned in my book, I take them to task on that. On the other hand, I do, I do sort of thank Michael Brune for trying to move them in the right direction. So, it's sort of, I hate to quote, the last person you want to quote, is Donald Rumsfeld. But I find myself, I find myself, he has some good quotes, and sort of you go to war with the army you have, not the one you might like to. In this case, we have some very powerful opponents, the fossil fuel industry. And we need all of the allies that we can get. So there does have to be some degree of compromise in forming this alliance. And it's always going to be a little uncomfortable. And we're going to have to work with organizations with which we don't agree. 100% of them, but hopefully maybe we agree with them more than 50% of the time. And with the polluters and those promoting their agenda, we agree with them 0% of the time. So I see where you're coming from. I really do. And it just comes down to some of the difficult rules of realpolitik, I guess. And where I come down is we don't have time. We have to act now. We've got to bring carbon emissions down by a factor of 2 within the next 10 years. So what we need to do is to get the action we can now while working to change the system for the better. And, you know, people ask me often, you know, what I think about capitalism. Can a resource-driven capitalist system be consistent with environmental sustainability? And I'm not convinced it can be. So I do think we ultimately need to move away from that system, but I don't think we're going to be successful in doing that within a few years. And we need to tackle this problem within a few years. So that's sort of where I come down.
We're speaking with Michael Mann, who is the director of Earth Systems Science Center at Penn State, my dreaded rival. I went to Rutgers.
I was a reject. Well, not really reject, but I had applied to Penn State, and they sent me a letter saying, well, you don't qualify for our main campus. And they offered me to go to Erie campus. And I'm like, oh, hell with that. So
Erie isn't so bad. The sun comes out like once or twice a year. It's really nice.
No, I'm from South Florida. That wasn't happening. I mean, I went to Colorado.
Sorry, Erie. I didn't mean that. No. Yeah.
Mike, if you could, if you have your phone, if you can hit the retweet button, we sent you a message so that way we can get more people watching for the next half hour. I do have. We do have a question from Felix Rios. I'm going to get to that, Felix, so just bear with us because we'll do like a rapid questionnaire at the end. I would say, you know, you said right now, and this is something that gets talked about constantly, which I think is very important, which is, yes, time is of the essence, but we have to recognize that we can't get everything in a vacuum. We can't get everything done immediately as much as we would like it to. With that said, if you can pick one specific environmental issue right now that—
I'm looking for the tweet, sorry.
Okay. Yep. It should be from Jen's account. So my question would be, you know, if we had like that one signature issue right now that you think would have the most immediate impact and the most necessary impact, because as you brought up earlier, he can follow. He's not like totally late yet.
I'm looking for it. I can't find it. I feel so bad. 10 minutes ago or?
No, if you look in private messages.
Oh, got it. There it is.
It's the private messages. That's not totally uncommon, but then again, it's also like one of those, do I really want to be bothered? Like, because if you're a public figure, you're technically not supposed to block people. There's I'm not
sure if I can share this because it's a private message. No, I'm just kidding. Here, I don't know how Twitter retweeted. Okay, sorry. So if the one thing, the one question was the one thing that.
Well, let's put it this way. You know, if I could pick one issue right now, the best thing that Biden has done domestically in terms of the environmental agenda was nixing the Keystone XL pipeline. But the one problem with that is that you have a lot of people who are now out of work. I think that the most important thing, the legacy that could be Biden's presidency, is will we finally get an infrastructure bill centered on clean energy jobs? I do think that is the future, and that is what can ultimately change things. And you got people from all over the political spectrum who advocates for this, whether it's Bernie, whether it's Andrew Yang, whether it's AOC. I think most people agree that we are at that point. In fact, Ayanna Pressley came out today in favor of a federal jobs guarantee. So I do think that the conversation is moving where it needs to. But if there is a signature issue, even if it's one, even if it's ban on fracking, what do you think would be the most readily available, singular issue we could fight for right now that would make a substantial difference, you think?
Thanks. And I have to say, it's always a tough question for me because I feel like we have to fire on all cylinders here. And so I don't want to leave anything out. But I do want to touch on, because you raised this issue about displaced workers, and I think that's really important. Now, some of that is industry propaganda, right? The fossil fuel industry wants you to think that this is job killing. Acting on the environment is job killing. And the Keystone XL pipeline, there may be 200 to 300 permanent jobs associated with the Keystone XL pipeline. They want you to think it's thousands and thousands of jobs, but it isn't. There's some temporary jobs in construction, but very few permanent jobs, because the fossil fuel industry is now highly automated. And that's the dirty secret they don't want you to know. They don't provide that many jobs. They do make huge profits, and they want to keep making those profits. And the coal industry, for example, they made huge profits on the backs of coal workers who I view as the victims. And here in Pennsylvania, you do have communities, coal communities, where, people were sort of stuck in, their, it's the only job in that area. And you sacrifice your health. People die of black lung. Hundreds of people have died in coal mine collapses, and the coal barons never seem to care. They continue to make profits. They continue to violate. And I think of Bob Murray, who passed away like a year ago. Murray Coal, that disaster some years ago, where dozens of coal miners were killed because he had failed to address any of the violations, and there are literally hundreds of violations, citations that he had. So let's be clear: the coal barons, those are the villains. The coal workers are the victims, and we have to make sure that there are jobs for them. We can't leave them behind. Look, we have to make this transition, right? I mean, we made the transition from whaling back in the 19th century. That used to be an industry. We got whale oil, that's how we lighted, our oil lamps. And, we stopped doing that because something much better came along, and that was fossil fuels. Well, look, something much better now has come along. The age of fossil fuels is ending because something better has come along. That's clean energy. That's renewable energy. So let's help. We don't mourn the loss of whaling jobs, right? We don't say, oh, those poor whalers who are out of work. We're happy that the people who used to be doing that are now doing something that doesn't involve, killing sentient, beings. And same thing here. We would like to make sure that there are opportunities for people displaced in these fossil fuel communities, in these coal communities. And that is one of the things that I like about the Biden executive actions. Look, we need legislation to really codify that. But the Biden executive actions do try to provide, substantial funding for this civilian climate corps, like the Peace Corps, but hire a bunch of people to help clean up the damage and degradation from fossil fuel extraction, provide jobs in those communities, and like to do things like turn brown fields into like new hubs of economic activity. So they're really, for too often, we've just paid lip service, right? Like, oh, well, we'll retrain them. Well, how are you going to retrain them if those jobs are halfway across the country? It's easy to say that. It's much more difficult to really do something that makes a difference. And I do think that the Biden administration is trying to do that. They've learned from some of the mistakes of the past, in particular, Hillary Clinton, when she didn't show enough apparent sensitivity to the plight of West Virginia coal miners and those workers. That's one of the things that might have lost her the election. So the Democratic Party has learned some hard-won lessons. And I hope that Biden will make good on those commitments. But as you said earlier, Peter, we have to keep the pressure on to make sure that they do.
Yeah,
I do. And again, I have to have the pessimistic eye. Not that I'm not optimistic. I'm as optimistic as anybody. I really am.
Oh, yeah.
But the reason why the pessimism sinks in is because there is a universal issue that basically unites all of us, as far as I'm concerned, and that is corporate special interest money in politics. It is the singular issue that everybody should be behind. Now, of course, we have three major cottage industries in the United States: big agriculture, big oil, and big pharma. But they all they're all interconnected in one way, shape, or form. Now, if you can talk about and what you've seen on Capitol Hill over the past, well, just again, it's a very short period of time, because I try to explain to people only in the past few years did anybody, especially on the Democratic side, even think about primarying sitting incumbents. Can you talk about the difference that you have now seen on the Hill over the past few years in terms of the way the conversation is shifting and getting elected representatives who do not take corporate special interest money, and how that does make a difference?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, John Fetterman, who is in Pennsylvania.
That guy.
Yeah, he's great. And he's going to be running for that open Senate seat when Toomey, the current Republican, steps down. And Fetterman just announced yesterday that,
Sorry.
we have a special guest. She's coming.
She's just needy.
Hi,
Sorry.
Lou.
Oh, no, you guys froze for a moment there. Sorry. It may have been at my end. But what's her name?
Lulu.
Lulu, what a cutie. So John Fetterman just announced with a tweet the other day that he would not accept any fossil fuel campaign money. And I do believe that all politicians should do that. They should refuse any fossil fuel funding. I don't think there's any question about that. A good friend of mine who you may be familiar with, Senator from Rhode Island, Sheldon Whitehouse, has really been leading the effort to get dirty money out of politics, to get dark money out of politics. And I do think that that is essential. I don't know how we solve some of these problems without getting special interest money out of politics. Now, I am a little encouraged by the fact that even with the flood of special interest money, we were able to get a Democrat elected. We were able to get back the Congress, the Senate, but just by the slimmest of margins. It shouldn't have been that close, right? It shouldn't have been a near split in the country between somebody like Donald Trump and somebody like Joe Biden. You talk about night and day. One would destroy the world if he could, if he benefited from it. The other, I believe, has a good heart. I really do. And that's a monumental difference. But, it was only 4.5% difference, near equal split. How can that happen? How could it be that somebody like Donald Trump got nearly half of the vote? Well, we can only understand that through the influence of dark money and dirty money in politics, and we've got to get rid of it. And I hope that Sheldon, has a larger majority working with him maybe 2 years from now, where we can actually get some real legislation through that starts to get the dark money out of politics. Ultimately, the Democrats have to win multiple presidential elections to get a Supreme Court that will be willing to reject the Citizens United decision that put us where we are today. And so it all comes down, it really does, to voting, and not just voting in the presidential years, but the off-term and the midterm elections. It's so important, because if we don't turn out in those elections, well, we know what happens. We get back, our polluted politicians.
Yeah, I think it's important to draw the connection between our military industrial complex and the level of pollution in the world. And this is one of the things that comes to my mind when I hear people trying to blame it on the individuals, because I'm thinking, if everyone I know recycled and drove their little hybrid cars and did the best they could, and our military was still our military, then it's not going to matter what we're all doing. And so that's something to me that's one of the biggest issues with climate, and people don't understand that connection.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that, look, we've been fighting foreign wars in dangerous places to keep the oil flowing. I mean, and so there is this inseparability between, our involvement in places we shouldn't have to be and we shouldn't be, and all in the name of protecting the interests of the fossil fuel industry. And by the way, when we talk about subsidies, and of course the Murdoch media and the climate change denial lobby love to rail against any subsidies for renewable energy that attempt to level the playing field, but they have no complaint about the subsidies that the fossil fuel industry gets. And the largest subsidy of all is literally the billions of dollars that we have spent fighting foreign wars. That is a subsidy to the fossil fuel industry that is never taken into account, and the environmental degradation and damage that is never taken into account. And if we were to do a full cost accounting to account for all of that damage and loss of life, we would never be continuing to provide support for new fossil fuel infrastructure. So, I guess the lesson is these things are inseparable. and we can't separate them, but the solutions are inseparable as well. If we get off fossil fuels, then we no longer have any reason to be fighting these dangerous foreign wars that are aimed at getting a hold of the remaining, oil reserves on the planet.
And I do think that that's one of the biggest reasons why, it seems to me that the issue of universal health care, particularly Medicare for all, has really captured the imagination of tens of millions of people in this country. But part of the reason why I think they fight so hard, even something as simple as health care being a human right, which it is in the overwhelming majority of the planet, is the fact that
it should be. Let's just say it. It should
of course. Yeah. And once one domino falls, I think they fear that the whole thing falls apart. That's what I think it comes down to. I think they know that the second the people, this is why, again, even right now, we're not getting, stimulus checks, which is in effect a universal basic income. The second the American people recognize that they have the power, it's all over. And now it's just a matter of whether or not people are going to be smart enough to coalesce. Because I think that there's a lot of opportunity, even on the GOP side, for them to really change the way they do business. There's a significant amount of the working class that supported Trump, even though Trump is what I call the false prophet. But the rhetoric was there for actually helping the people in need. And to me, that as much as anything is what I think we can accomplish going forward. Now, is there anybody on the GOP side who's smart enough to think, man, if I just say the rhetoric, but I say I'm taking no corporate special interest money whatsoever, I have no doubt that there will be sort of this catch fire type circumstance. And Jen, I think you can speak to a relationship that you have here in Broward with a person in the Republican Party who is all about the environment, is all about protecting.
Yeah, it's interesting. We need to stop labeling people and assuming what their stance is on different positions. We have an issue here where we often will have developers that want to do drilling or fracking in our Everglades, and where they want to do that.
What could possibly go wrong, right? Yeah.
What could go wrong? We're built on limestone. So since you're a scientist, I could just say we're built on limestone. Our drinking water is like an X of these two canals that come down. And this oil company wanted to drill right in the middle of the X. What could go wrong? So I actually made a connection in the Republican community here, and they are very pro, in where we come from, Everglades restoration.
Right.
And so anybody who's for Everglades restoration is going to automatically be against the drilling and the fracking and all that stuff.
Right.
So those are, in that case, those are my allies.
Right.
And so I just think it's important that we cross those lines. And I think that that's why, for me, I do everything on a per issue basis. And who your ally is on one thing, maybe they're not on something else, but why not work with everyone on the issues that you can work with?
Yeah, absolutely. And Carlos Curbelo down there has been an advocate. He's a lot of those Republican advocates for climate action are ex-politicians, are no longer in office. But they are pressuring their party to be on the right side of this issue. And I do think that there are some moderate Republicans who they don't want history to look back at them as having been on the wrong side of the defining challenge of our time. I do think that that weighs on the minds of some of these folks, and that they are persuadable. A lot of them aren't. And you talked about false prophets. Donald Trump is a false prophet, but he stood for corporate profit, and that's all that mattered to the vested interests, who are very good at manipulating. I think of them as sort of the ground forces, the voters, right? They need to win elections, to remain in power, they need to turn out people. And one of the great tragedies of modern politics has been the ability of one party in particular, the Republican Party, to convince large numbers of people to vote against their own interest. And they've done that through clever propaganda campaigns. So it comes down to, again, the money in politics. You throw enough money in the form of advertising campaigns, et cetera, you can convince people to do just about anything, including voting completely against their own self-interest. And that's what Trumpism really is about. The very people who by and large supported him are the people most hurt by his policies. And so, yeah, I mean, I actually forget your original question, but I think we're pretty much all in the same,
Yeah, the importance of essentially not, again, we are a very divided country, but both sides benefit from that. That is what is most important, because corporate special interest money flows through the Democratic coffers as much as the GOP. The only difference is the Democratic side actually has a completely grassroots uprising that is happening within the party right now. Ayanna Pressley, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Marie Newman, Jamal Bowman, Ro Khanna, Cori Bush.
Yeah.
There are some really solid progressives that are in there. And
look, they've pulled, let's be clear. They pulled Biden quite a bit towards, the progressive direction, toward, the left on environmental issues, through the pressure that they brought to bear during the election and thereafter. And part of why Biden has been surprisingly bold on climate was because he was held accountable by progressives in the party. And so it works. It really does. I mean, it's so important to do. And even if, those progressives didn't get their ideal candidate, and a lot of those folks, supported Bernie Sanders, for example, Bernie Sanders and the movement behind him really moved us dramatically in the right direction on climate. And it's why we're seeing such a bold agenda. So I don't want to say we rest on our laurels, but we recognize that it does make a difference, that activism really does make a difference.
And as you know, right now, I would say if we're being complete, and again, I don't want to overinflate the numbers in any way, but I would say if we're being completely honest about who are the true progressives that are in Congress right now, I'd say it's probably between a dozen to 15 people, if we're being absolutely fair. When the Tea Party took over Congress, they had about 40 representatives that were following that ideology. Right. Could you even imagine how much of an impact the progressive movement can have if they had 40 sitting congressional representatives? I mean, listen, it could very well happen in the next few years. It could. Because the momentum is building. People have to recognize that it is happening. And I think if we were able to get there, I mean, the sky's the limit, because you would really have you'd have an environmental caucus that was legitimate. You'd have a progressive caucus that was legitimate. And I do think that if you were to get 30 representatives, the type of impact that movement would have on the Hill is significant. Everything would have to be approved based on what they felt was applicable to get through the House and the Senate potentially. Senate's a little bit more complicated, but the House, absolutely, no question.
No, I agree. And I think we do see that, right? I mean, we're going through a cultural tipping point moment now on issues of racial justice, and that intersects, of course, with climate justice. And all of that's becoming mainstream for the Democratic Party, a mainstream position that we have to act on issues of racial justice, social justice, and climate justice. That's become the mainstream of the Democratic Party, and that wasn't really true, a few years ago. And so, again, I think that there's clear evidence that pressure really does. It does move the center of the party in the right direction. It isn't just, the people who might be in the progressive wing of the party and their immediate influence. It's how they are impacting everybody else within the party, moving the whole party. And that's what the Republican Party has been so effective at doing, where we've reached a point now where Ronald Reagan would have been primaried. If he was a Republican senator, he would have been primaried as a left, I mean, a rhino, a left-leaning rhino. Today, Ronald Reagan wouldn't even find any place in today's Republican Party. They have been very effective.
Blend in with like Joe Biden. He'd blend in lovely with the current central Democrats.
Honestly, you look back on Reagan's legacy, and I still say that the thing that he did that hurt this country more than anything else is that he crushed labor. And when he fired the air traffic controllers in the summer of '81, it broke the labor movement, and it essentially forced the hand of the Democrats, who then ultimately started the third way, the DLC, as you know, and then it became
corporate money.
The corporate party. They decided that banks were more important than labor.
They
unions.
weren't getting money from labor unions because labor unions were completely neutered, and so they started taking corporate money. So it kind of all stems back to.
But that whole thing about the environmental movement right now, I think a lot of it is being done in conjunction with a sort of a resurgence in the labor movement. I do think that that is what is coming. This just something as simple as pushing the envelope on the $15 minimum wage. Everything in many ways, as far as I can see, is interconnected. And you've been following this, I'm sure, for a long time. A lot of these things, it's almost like a perfect puzzle. You remove one piece, the whole thing falls apart, but you connect that other piece that needs to be there, and everything can come together. Like I said, that's why I think the establishment fights as hard as they do, because they know as soon as the people get a taste of what it's like to actually live in
a civilization,
it's over. It's over. It's just a matter of when it happens. And I think as long as we have individuals like you, and again, we're speaking with Michael Mann, his book is The New Climate War, and it is going to be one hell of a fight, because even though the Democrats are in charge, they take corporate money too, but we are moving the needle. Michael, any final thoughts? Definitely want to know about, what your plans are going forward.
Yeah,
Obviously,
thanks.
That I think that would be great for the audience, and I certainly hope we can continue this conversation going forward.
Absolutely.
We're trying to do what we can to really build a true progressive movement down here in South Florida. It's a long time coming.
Well, no, I really appreciate that, and it's incredibly important. We saw in the last election how this isn't the Florida. We didn't see the Florida that I know and love, and so we need to return that state to its rightful role in our national politics, because it's been captured in some ways through I don't know, dubious means, I would say, by the political right. But it's not the Florida that I know and love, like I said. Going forward, I do think that there's an incredible opportunity for us, that we really are at the cusp of seeing the action that we need on climate. And I am optimistic about, the early actions on the part of the Biden administration and the signal that's sending to the rest of the world, and is putting pressure on other intransigent actors like Australia, currently led by a conservative Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, who is a friend to the fossil fuel industry there. I did a sabbatical there last year. I was there during the Black Summer when bushfires raged across the entire continent, and we all witnessed the devastating impacts of climate change. But they have this stranglehold on their media by the Murdoch empire. Much of their media is owned by Murdoch, and he promotes climate change denialism and all of these other tactics that I talk about in The New Climate War: deflection, division, etc. So the bottom line is we're really close. We're so close to seeing the progress we've worked for so long. There are still these obstacles in our way. Let's recognize them. Let's learn how to fight back against these rear guard attacks that we're still experiencing from the fossil fuel and lobby and the inactivists, because we're so close. We just need to clear away those obstacles. But in order to do that, we've got to recognize them. And so the reason I wrote this book is that I felt that, there were these insidious new tactics that were being used to divide us, to deflect attention from the needed policy solutions, to promote doom and despair so that we feel helplessness and become disengaged. I wanted to help people understand those tactics that are being used against us, so we can recognize them, fight back against them, and win this war, for lack of a better word, this war for our planet, for a sustainable planet, for a planet that our children and grandchildren will inherit and hopefully still be able to thrive on. So that's still a possible future, but our window of opportunity to ensure that future is shrinking. So this is our moment. This is our time. Let's do it.
Michael, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it
Yeah,
very
we've
much.
been
I'm going to
getting,
put the picture up again of the
Yeah,
book.
we've
Everybody
been getting
needs
a
to
lot
read
of, I mean, again, this is 2:00 in the afternoon, and I can only imagine how crazy a schedule. I know you've been on all national media and all that, so I can imagine how many sleepless nights you've been having.
No worries.
I can tell you that the responses we've been getting in the chat have been exceptionally positive.
Yeah.
They are all saying what a great conversation it is. A number of people have already said they're going to buy the book. So clearly this has been worthwhile on both ends, and we certainly hope you'll keep in touch. And like I said, Jen is a true advocate for the environment. It's one of the signature issues that she ran on, and we're only going to grow this thing into something bigger with, obviously, with individuals like
we're going to be underwater here.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're going to. I need scuba gear.
Either we're going to save ourselves or we're going under. So either way, I think it'd be better to save ourselves.
We're working on it.
That's my thought.
You guys are on the front lines. There's no question about it in both senses of the word. Let's keep the conversation going. Happy to come back and talk again.
Thank you so
We
much.
certainly will. Michael, thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and all the best selling the book.
Thank you.
See ya. Bye-bye.
There you go.
So
stop screen.
So needless to say, this is one of the most informative podcasts we've ever done. Michael definitely knows his stuff very well. He's obviously.
It's always nice to talk to people that know what they're talking about.
Well, yeah.
It's just, go figure.
He has obviously more optimism in the Democratic Party as currently constructed than I would, but we're completely on the same page in terms of non-corporate representatiants getting in and making that impact.
And I think that the other thing that was nice to hear was a sense of optimism based on the negative narrative that we're being fed to keep us defeatist, to keep the fossil fuel industry churning. And so while we do have a grave situation, that makes sense that the powers that be would be making it out to be even worse.
Oh, of course. You unfortunately, as we know, we also have dishonest actors that work on our side of the aisle.
Of course.
There's always going to be people who are going to do what they're going to do, which is there's money to be made.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that Michael Shellenberger is somebody who is being disingenuous about the need for to move to nuclear. He might actually be right about that, but there are definite nefarious actors in the movement.
One of the things that, it's almost like you can't do it enough is vet people and figure out, follow their money train and what they're really seeking to gain, what is their really hidden agenda. And that's really the best you can do. But even when you do that and people are in it for the right reasons, you're still going to have different opinions and people are going to have different thoughts on this because this isn't something that we do know for sure.
No,
we're sort of feeling it as we're going and some of it is unknown.
Now, even though there are dangers to, nuclear, there's no question nuclear waste is an issue. But we have to see where the technology goes. And I think anybody reasonable would say that there's a lot less danger in terms of environmental destruction. Again, everybody talks about Chernobyl and obviously what happened in Japan.
Yes, but I think that a lot of that stuff is old technology, old methods.
Correct.
And I think that we have to look at countries like France that, from my understanding, is very significantly powered by nuclear power.
I think Germany as well.
Okay. So there are positive experiences with that. So I think
the bottom line is there less danger and less environmental impact with nuclear versus coal and natural gas?
Well,
yes.
That's the balance. That's the balance. So we have somebody here from Wales, which kind of cool for you because you're getting an evening live stream. We normally do an evening live stream, which is, I guess, for you, the middle of the night normally. Yes. So you're getting our evening live stream.
Well, Neil Brand, if you can subscribe on, and again, I'll put it up. You
subscribe
definitely want to subscribe
on YouTube.
on YouTube. That's where we're at. That's where we need everybody to be.
Yeah, everybody, if you're not subscribed on YouTube, it's very helpful to us for you to do so. And yeah, that's cool. I want to go to Wales. But I think every time somebody's on here from somewhere else, I'm going to sit here and be like, oh, I want to go there.
Yes.
But my older son is Reese, and that is a Welsh name, and I have a fondness, and Graham is English. So I have a fondness for things UK. I do. And I love me a Scotsman. I do. You can't do it well, and you fall somewhere into Irish.
Well,
and I have made the mistake of confusing a Scotsman for an Irishman, right? And don't do that.
Well, I'm not Scots, so I'm Irish.
All right. Well, I have no problem with the Irish, but I just happen to have a very particular liking of Scotsmen.
I really think it was wonderful that this Michael Mann came on the show today, and he really talked about a very important issue, which is protecting the environment. He has written a really great book. I've written a couple myself, so I know a good book when I read one, and he definitely knows what he's talking about. So I would highly recommend that everybody read The New Climate War, because we are in a war against ourselves. We have to protect the environment. And the only way we're going to do that is if we get off of fossil fuels. I don't take any fossil fuel money, and we need to elect more representatives who don't take the fossil fuel money. It's dirty money. It shouldn't be in politics. We're going to do everything we can to get rid of it. Right, Jen?
We're working on it. I mean, we're working on it. You know, again, your endorsement might be helpful to some people that are working on it, but
Well, let me know when you're running, and then I'll decide whether I'm going to endorse
I
you
know
or not.
how it
I already
works.
told you my wife is paying attention. I can't pay attention to everything.
all right.
Give me a break.
That's what you say.
Jane, listen, you're going to have to talk to her at some point because
Jane.
clearly what I'm doing is not enough. I don't know what to tell you. I'll tell Jane she should come on the podcast. Okay?
I'd love for Jane to come on the podcast. Ooh, that
Jane
would
would
be
love
really
to come on the
cool.
podcast.
Oh
We'll
my
definitely
God,
get her on the
that would
schedule.
be
See what we can do.
really cool.
Yeah. Well, I cannot, for the life of me, understand why people think that we don't need to protect the environment. It's a
I'd
very
love to see
serious-
her as first lady, whether or not you ever got to be president, because it would be like having this sort of like Earth Mama hippie woman in the White House, and I would totally
I don't
dig
think they're
that.
ever going to let me be president. I think they definitely would have done everything in their power to stop me from doing it.
I think
but
so.
I think we have definitely built an amazing movement. It is about not me, us, and we are going to continue to build that movement going forward. And it has to be centered on the most important issues facing our country today. We need to have a Green New Deal. I think having your co-host Peter, he brings up a great idea. We need an infrastructure bill centered on clean energy jobs. That is a really, really great idea. I think that could definitely help out a great deal. But we also have to have universal health care, Medicare for all, single payer. That is exactly what we need. We are going to continue to fight for that particular issue. And on top of that, we definitely need a living wage. Trying to get to $15 an hour seems to be much more difficult than it should be. My good friend Joe, he's not being such a good friend on this particular issue. So
Your
I don't
friend
know what
Joe
he's doing.
sucks.
And if I was president, I guarantee you I would have canceled student debt. And we would have made public colleges and universities tuition free. And it would have been a lot easier for people to get the right paying jobs and get the education that they need. I'm sorry, I did the best I could, but you know what? I am the chair of the Senate Budget Committee, and that does mean something. And there's no telling what we might be able to accomplish. So I'm going to continue to work really hard, and I appreciate all of your support. Jen, anything to add?
No, but you don't like it when I lean over and read things, but I want to read comments, and you make it hard. Okay.
Okay. Now, you want to read a comment? Anything in particular?
Well, I just don't know if I can answer this question. Oh, it has to do with carbon capture and sequestration is a way to make the bridge high fossil fuel. Okay, yeah, that's way above my pay grade.
I don't know much about carbon capture, but I know that carbon hurts the environment.
I would suggest who is that? Felix, you should check out his book. Check out Michael Mann's book.
Yes, definitely check out his book because he is a good man. I know he's friendly with my friend Sheldon Whitehouse. He's definitely making an impact. There's no question that we need to work together to fix the environmental problem in this country. But it all starts with fossil fuels. And I have to say, Senator Cruz, he made a really big ass of himself.
Oh my
God,
God, Senator Cruz is a big
ass. To be taking care of your people in Texas and you abandon them for Mexico? I thought you cared about your people. Apparently you don't.
No.
Unfortunately, you're stuck with Ted until 2024. Ugh, so in the meantime, Ted. I certainly want to send my best to the people in Texas. We know that they're suffering right now, but we're going to do everything we can.
I have a lot of friends in Texas. I went to law school in Texas, so I have a lot of friends.
Are all your exes in Texas?
No.
Okay. Well, that was an old song.
Yeah.
It's from my day. I'm a little old, but that's okay.
A little old.
No, that's. But
no, I have a lot of friends in Texas, and they are
Wonderful.
without power, and it is a very dire situation for people right now. They have no power and no water. Although I do have a friend that's going to have to start flushing bottles of wine to be able to flush toilets. But, desperate times call for desperate measures. I just hope he goes with the white and not the red. But
that's unfortunate. I mean, Cabernet. I mean, that's.
Well, I know. I just think it'll stain the inside of the toilet bowl.
Yeah, well, listen, it's either that or what are you going to do?
I know. Well, this is a problem.
Yeah, it's a real.
This is our capitalist, private-owned
fossil fuel
utilities in Texas. How well of a job they're doing.
Well, the fossil fuel industry spends a lot of money to make sure that they don't have to face any consequences for the things that they do. That's why they get Governor Abbott and Senator Cruz to go on TV and make complete fools of themselves and say that it is renewable energy that is the problem here. That is incredibly narcissistic, inappropriate, and just plain wrong.
It's just wrong.
Clean energy is the future, and that is what we need. And Texas, unfortunately, is having a little bit of a crisis right now.
Yeah.
Not just in their environmental problems, but their economic problems. They are not identifying the fact that you have to go to renewable energy. That is the future, and that is what we need to do. So I am asking all of you, if you are in Texas, keep spreading the word. We need to get rid of Governor Abbott in a couple of years. Don't know who's going to run. Might be better.
Interestingly, I have 2 law school friends from my graduating class that I believe 2, there might be more, but 2 for sure, that are serving in the Texas legislature right now.
Well, maybe they might want to run for governor.
Well, I know a few people that would actually,
Yeah,
maybe.
there's a lot of good people out there that really need to consider running for high office and even for local office, everything in between. But as long as you're running with
Ina
no
Mahares.
corporate special interest money, that is what you have to do. If you choose to run, you cannot run with any of that dirty money. It makes all the difference. You have to run as a grassroots candidate, and the people will be there to support you. You just have to support the issues that are most important to them right now, because our government is not working for them, and we're going to make it work for them. Remember, like I said, I am the chair of the Senate Budget Committee.
I've heard.
But that's what I was wrong. I mean, well, no, wait, I didn't say that out loud. But it's an important title. You know, I ran for president to become the chair of the Senate Budget Committee, and now everything goes through Bernie. Goes through me.
Bernie.
I make that decision. Jen, it's great to see you. It's great to be on the show. Anybody said that they were going to be talking about the environment today was a significant, important issue. And anytime that happens, I am always going to show up on this podcast to make sure that this is an important issue that needs to be spread far and wide. Many people can talk about it as possible. I really am glad that you guys are here today. So please continue to spread the word. I love you all. I'll see you soon.
John wants to know how your Joe impression is going. I'm not loving it. I'm not loving it, John.
Come on, man.
That's all he can say is that one phrase. Like, that's the problem. You know what it is?
We hold these truths to be and you know the thing.
It's okay. Like, you kind of have the words, but it's not the right, you're not having the right tone. It's not right.
I haven't practiced it enough to really get it down. You know, Bernie, I just happen to know because I was born in Brooklyn and I'm from Jersey, so I can get the tone just like I can totally get the tone.
No Trumpus. So there was one last thing in News and Amuse that I don't think you got to. I don't know what it was. I'm assuming it had something to do with the COVID vaccine. But I did see that was up there and that we didn't quite finish. So I don't even know what you were wanting to talk about with that.
What I will finish with is our governor, Ron DeSantis, is now doing just like, because again,
she's right.
Yeah.
With Joe. Yeah. All right, go on.
He is just like Trump because he's mini Trump. That's what he is.
Well, he was put there by Trump.
Yeah. And now on top of everything else, you've got Matt Gaetz coming out saying that, I'd like to see Ron DeSantis run for president in 2024.
I shouldn't laugh because I remember laughing back when it was thrown around that W was going to be president.
I'm like, wait a minute, Bush is running again? No, it's his son.
And I remember I didn't vote for him. He was too much of a moron for me to vote for him for governor. I was living in Texas. And I remember thinking, he's an idiot. Everyone in Texas knows he's an idiot. Why would anybody pick him? And yet there he was. So you can't ever assume.
And again, for the last 4 years, all anybody ever wanted to talk about was how Trump was an illegitimate president. I'll tell you who an illegitimate president was, and it was George W. Bush. And this was on top of the fact that Gore did not want anything to do with Clinton on the campaign trail. It ultimately cost him Tennessee and Arkansas, and he only needed to win one of them. He didn't even need to win Florida, and he would have been president. But as it turns out, Gore did actually win Florida, and that is something that never gets talked about after the fact.
Yeah, there's that.
What should have been? What could have been?
Which is so interesting how everybody's talking about these filthy, dirty elections now. And yet back then, the entire discussion was about hanging chads. And in the meantime, we had 8 years of an illegitimate president.
And we also don't want to be looking backward. But the one thing we didn't talk about with Michael, which I think we possibly could have touched on, was how much different it would have been if Gore did become president, because Gore's always been an advocate for the environment. And considering everything that came with the Bush administration and so forth, you never know. But again, you can't look backward. You can only look forward. You can only work on what you can work on right now. But with DeSantis, what he's doing is he's doing exactly what Trump was doing when he was president. He was basically saying, if you don't support me and my agenda, I'm not going to get you your vaccine, or I'm not going to get you your federal dollars that you need.
So you're saying that our governor is dangling the vaccine over people.
Correct.
That's nice.
Yes.
That's very human-like.
And so, but I wouldn't expect anything less. Why would you? Because Ron DeSantis is a sociopathic buffoon, and he
We have a
doesn't
nice
care.
commentary here.
But the thing that I will say is that Ron really does owe his governorship to Trump.
Well,
Trump made him governor. He
and
really
maybe,
did.
And maybe that will help him, or maybe that'll hurt him in a couple of years.
In a state like Florida, you never know. But that all depends on what type of a progressive movement we continue to build. Because again, I don't know what the hell Ron does to this state that actually makes it better. I really don't. And he was doing okay up until COVID.
And I've always said, the truth is that we had Rick Scott for 8 years. So our bar is so low that he didn't really have to do much.
No, he really didn't. And on top of everything else, now it's going to get interesting because it looks like Nikki Fried is about to jump into the gubernatorial race.
Why? Well, we knew
She
this.
just released
We
her
knew
first
this
ad.
was
We knew
gonna
it was
happen.
we knew it was coming. You know, but obviously we are in favor of
Yes.
somebody else running for governor.
I think that's going to happen too.
But it'll be a very interesting race, and I think it'll be dirty because Nikki is going to take the corporate money.
Yeah, of course.
And it's always going to cloud what is the primary fight or the primary issues of the fight that we're focused on right now. Now, a state like Florida obviously is different than a lot of others from myriad of reasons. There's no question that Nikki... Myriad of reasons.
Myriad.
Oh, I said it wrong?
Yeah.
Well, it depends on what part of the country you're from, I guess.
No.
That's
not
myriad.
a word.
Okay, so myriad. I said it wrong. Excuse me. What I want to know is, are people really going to focus on the issues and where the money comes from, or is this more about allowing the establishment to fill the narrative of, yeah, well, this is the only person who can win. Nobody else can actually win.
Well, that they always do that. They always do that. And I am not a believer that Florida is really a swing state. I am not a believer that there is enough blue. I really am not. The only thing that will make the difference here is the handling of COVID. And if that is going to be enough in and of itself to really hurt DeSantis in the election, and that is going to be something that would be needed in order for, I believe, for a Democrat to win this state, no matter who that Democrat is.
That's true.
But there's not going to be enough of a distinction in this state between a corporate Dem and Ron DeSantis that it will be able to work even in the best of circumstances. So it needs to be a perfect storm.
Yeah. And the only reason, and again, if Nikki was the nominee, I would vote for her because, again, you're talking about a couple of reasons in this particular state why that would be necessary. You haven't had a Democratic governor in over 2 decades, which is unbelievable. So when people say it's a swing state,
well, that's the thing. It really isn't.
Not really buying that.
It's not.
Nikki's got a pretty good record on civil liberties, which, especially when it comes to cannabis, is very important. But again, if you have the corporate money, you never know what direction they may go in. Now, the one thing she will end up doing as the Democratic governor is she can stop really bad legislation like Senator Brandis trying to screw around with the $15 minimum wage.
Right.
That should not be touched. With a governor like DeSantis, it is possible that something as barbaric as what they're trying to do could actually pass. So that's something we would have to consider.
The other thing that I don't think people from out of the state realize is just how sort of sad and pathetic our Florida Democratic Party is. It's very, very weak. It really only exists in a handful of places in the state.
Right.
And they're pretty feckless. So, and they are corporate controlled. So they're corporate controlled and weak. That is not the kind of an organization that is going to get their stuff together enough and strong enough to defeat Ron DeSantis in 2 years, unless I think he's been completely demolished by his handling of COVID. There has to be the anti-DeSantis.
Well,
that has to exist.
The one thing that does exist, which I do think will make it possible for DeSantis to lose, because I don't think Marco Rubio is losing his seat. That's my opinion.
No, probably not.
DeSantis actually does have a scandal. He covered up the data on COVID, and then they chose to literally go after this, to go after Rebecca Jones in a way that is, again, it's criminal. They raided her home. They stole her laptop. They did it all. And we all know why they do that. They do that because they have something to hide. That's why you do things like that. And you're seeing what's happening in New York right now with Cuomo.
But if that doesn't get enough, it has to be enough people knowing about it and caring enough and getting enough media attention for it to hurt him. So I think in order for Ron DeSantis to lose, there are 2 things that need to happen. One, we'll talk about that. We sort of touched on it, but one, people have to really dislike DeSantis. Okay.
Yeah.
There has to be that.
That's true.
And then on top of that, there needs to be a Democrat that is enough of a distinction. And yes, we do like Anna 𝘕𝘠𝘠. That is the person that we've had her on the show. I would suggest if you're interested, we did interview her. Go back and look at our interview with Anna 𝘕𝘠𝘠. She is progressive. She doesn't take corporate money. She is basically the candidate, the only one that I know of.
She don't have baggage.
Anne doesn't take corporate money. She's the only one I know of, a progressive candidate that doesn't take corporate money, that's even considering going into this race.
And considering how we are one of the most gerrymandered states in the entire country, she actually represents a swing district and she wins it fairly comfortably.
Yeah.
So credit to her, knowing that she's in the I-4 corridor. So she's exactly where the heart of the state actually is and actually matters.
And as of right now, she has not declared, but we believe.
And she's doing it right. Let Nikki get in first.
Oh,
you don't
well,
want,
we
you
knew
always
that
want
was
to get
going
in
to happen. And
you
the thing is,
come in after that.
There is a very, very strong distinction between those two people.
I
So there's not going to be, there's no crossover there.
And the other thing that really works in Anna's favor is that there isn't another true popular progressive who is in elected office right now, who is even thinking about running or would even have a chance to run.
Yeah.
There are other center Democrats and even corporate Democrats. Look, we're friendly with Jason Pizzo. He is not on our side when it comes to some primary issues, but there is a likelihood that he's going to run. If he does run, that's not going to hurt Anna. That's going to hurt Nikki. So Anna's
alone in her field.
Anna has her lane.
Yes.
And the reason this can work is because it worked for Gillum.
But I still maintain that there has to be strong enough hate vote against DeSantis at the same time.
Now, why I think it doesn't matter is because for Anna, she really should run, because if she does, even if she doesn't win, even if she's the nominee and loses to DeSantis, it's going to be an open seat in 2028 or 2026.
Yeah.
So because of that, it will allow her to build her name recognition.
And no, I wasn't suggesting that she doesn't do that. I'm just suggesting I don't think
it's going to be a very
he needs
uphill
to get the
battle.
hate vote.
And
there needs to be the hate vote.
And it's also an off-year election. So, you know how well the GOP typically does. And even though the GOP is shattered in many ways across the nation, it ain't shattered in Florida. And Ron DeSantis is very popular with the Republican base, and he's very popular with Trump. So because of that, he's definitely going to be one of the toughest gets. With that said, anything's possible. And you might as well fight for it, because DeSantis ain't fighting for what we're fighting for.
I will say that we had Alan Ellison on, and he is challenging Marco Rubio.
We love him.
Yes, we like Alan Ellison. I would also suggest people go back and look at that interview with him. I want to be optimistic about that. I don't know what that primary field will look like. I have no idea what the primary field will look like. Right now, I think he's the only person in it.
As of right now, yes.
And obviously, we'd love to see Rubio go.
Yes. The thing that Alan is going to have to watch out for is, and again, Melissa, who is one of our most amazing team members.
Melissa is our volunteer coordinator.
She is super duper awesome, and she is up there in the I-4 corridor. There is a very high likelihood that Val Demings is going to get in the race. And if that happens, then you're talking about the Democratic establishment literally
will put the hammer down on top of Alan Ellison. They will put the hammer down on
Alan in every which way. They will do, and again, she's a black woman. So they are not going to allow him to use any type of leverage that he may have. They are going to use the identity politics against him, even though he's a black man. It doesn't matter, because this is what the establishment does. And it's what they will do. No disrespect to Val, but it's all about corporate special interest money.
And that's all that matters. And people have to understand, our state party, the party organization itself, is completely co-opted by corporate interests. Our state party is sponsored by Big Sugar and Walmart.
Yes.
Those are their, so, it isn't just the individuals.
But give Alan credit, because he has really put in the work. He has run for Congress twice already. So he has name recognition.
Yes,
he has a lot of people that have voted for him. And he is also doing, which is the smart move, a 67 county strategy, which is what you should do. Because in a primary, you want to get as many of those votes as you possibly can. With that said, you know,
And the state party will ignore a lot of those counties.
they will. And the battle lines are going to get drawn very, very quickly. Like I said, Nikki's already showing that she's about ready to jump in this thing. She's already raising money. I've gotten the emails, so I know it's
all right. Now you're jumping back to the governor's race. We're all over the place.
But what I'm saying is, well, again, at the end of the day, they're running side by side. You know, the
Yeah.
likelihood that you're going to get a progressive candidate on one side and a corporate candidate on the other side, that would be very interesting if that did end up happening.
Well, it all also depends on what the menu choices are.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
true.
I mean,
But I do think Anna has a legitimate shot.
Well, she is the only look. If it's her against a whole pool of corporate Dems,
then I think it just increases her likelihood because again, Gillum
She knows that.
Gillum ran as the progressive, and Gillum had baggage, and he still won. And despite all of the bigotry that was thrown in his direction, and believe me, I saw it. One of the things they like to do on national TV, when you have a person of color who's on TV, they like to make them darker. Make them darker. That's a fact. They've been doing this for decades and decades and decades. And I'll never forget the first time I saw it. I said, "Oh, I know exactly what they're doing here because I've met the man, I've spoken to him, and I know how dark his skin is, and it is nowhere near as dark as they make it on television."
Can we just first say for a second that I wouldn't care if he were literally black?
No.
Like, why does that matter?
But what it is that it's a psychological thing that they play on older white voters. Just like when I had to deal with people in the Democratic Party who said, "Oh, a black man's never going to win statewide office or a primary in the state." That's their way of telling you, I'm not voting for a black man. Never forget, this is still—
I disagree with that.
Well,
I do, because I remember when Obama was running, and I was very wanting to vote for him and very supportive of the idea of him at the time. Forgive me, that was early on.
I voted for Obama.
I voted for him twice. But anyway, and I was suspect as to whether or not I thought a black man could win the presidency in this country. I remember thinking, I don't know. And it certainly wasn't that I wasn't going to vote for him or that I didn't want him. So I don't think that questioning the ability of someone to do something or whether or not other people are ready for something means you don't support it. I supported it.
But you know what? At the end of the day, I don't judge not by the color of one's skin, but by the content
yes,
of
and
their
yet
character.
we live in Florida, and that's not how it works here.
No, but that's
and the truth is that's not how it works anywhere.
Well, people always fear the unknown, and with that said, it's again when you are overwhelmed with the amount of money that one is going to end up getting in their coffers, especially in the third most populous state and a state that is still considered swing. It's very tough. It is. But Anna has done an amazing job as a state house representative. She has really separated herself as somebody who really tries to help as many people as possible, especially dealing with the DEO unemployment system in the state of Florida. And
she's been helping people in other representatives' districts because their representatives have been useless.
Correct. So needless to say, we certainly hope she gets in.
Yeah.
And if she does, it's going to get ugly, but that's politics.
Anna's a change maker. Anna is someone who does see politics as service. Anna is someone who really is the epitome of what we're trying to get more of in our political atmosphere. I mean, that's what we're trying to do here.
And while we're not completely there yet with the non-corporate representation, having her run, I think, will have a tremendous impact. I do, because I do think that she's in it for the right reasons. Unfortunately, we feel terrible for what happened to Andrew, but he was in it for a career. There's no question he was much more of a career-oriented politician.
Or at least he allowed himself to be sort of co-opted by establishment consultants and voices and leading him in that centrist direction.
Whereas Anna, I mean,
she's not in
everything
it for that.
She's shown so far is that she truly cares and that she really wants to do right by this state. And I certainly hope that she will get
So
in. Everybody
pay attention, be on the lookout.
Gonna get very interesting going forward. So with that said, Jen, before we depart, let everybody know what show you're going to be on tomorrow night.
What show am I being on?
You're John, let the
I think we're better off having John say which show. But all right, but what I did want to talk about is we did put this up here. For anybody watching, if you would like to get involved with GenCore, please email Melissa. And you can also sign up on our website, which is generationalchange.com. But we are hopefully soon going to have links on our webpage so that people who want to help us, meaning our movement, that don't live here, because for the most part, GenCore is hands-on, we volunteer here. But what I really want to encourage everybody to do out there is to get on the phones and start phone banking and helping the candidates that we're supporting, people like Nina Turner, people like Lee Carter, people like Isaiah James, although their race is kind of far off. But the races that are really coming up now that I think are important are obviously Nina Turner and Lee Carter. And who else is coming up? Like,
we have two candidates that we support in New York for the mayor's race, Andrew Yang and Diana Morales.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of ranked choice voting. You can do that.
But who, like, in terms of really who we're, I mean, we want people to get involved with those campaigns right now. If you can't be
well, we're going to have Ali Desimer, I think is how you say her name. I think she's in Maryland, as a matter of fact. We're going to have a number of them coming on the show. But Facts on the Ground podcast.
Oh, there it is.
Where Jen is going to be on tomorrow night at 8 p.m. So definitely make sure that you tune in there. One of the topics that is going to be discussed is something that we will discuss at length even further on Monday night show, which is we are planning a free Assange telethon, I guess.
Well, yes, this is in the planning stages because I've never done something so massive. But really what we're trying to accomplish right now is I would like to coordinate a pardon-free, whatever you want to call it, Assange online live stream telethon, get as many of the content creators as possible to participate, have comedians. And I mean, John wants to sort of set it up like different panels. I have an idea of kind of mixing it up. So anybody who turns on at any time sees an array of journalists, politicians, comedians, whatever, have it mixed up. I'm not exactly sure, but this is my plan. I've reached out to Katie Halper, and she has said that she would be willing to co-host that with me. So we just really have to get all our ducks in a row. And it's hard because you're coordinating a lot of schedules. And technologically, I don't think we're all that in the bag of chips.
No, we've already got a couple of confirms. So yeah, it's
okay.
But that will be discussed on.
Yes,
on
that more on that. That will probably be in the 3rd or 4th week in March. Barring something miraculous like a pardon for Assange between now and then, which
not likely.
Well, look, I'm trying to be an optimist. So I would, as much as I am looking forward to doing a telethon for Assange, I'd rather not have to.
Correct.
So if somebody decides ahead of time that, you know what, we're going to drop this charge because 1, it's unconstitutional, it's ridiculous, and it's a violation of our First Amendment, or Joe Biden just pardons him, like, you know, there's a few different avenues. But anyway, the key ask is I want every single person to be flooding the switchboards of Joe Biden's office and the DOJ and the Attorney General's office demanding that they do not prosecute Julian Assange. So that's really the ask. And there will be some other things. Apparently, they're not letting him have winter clothing, and they're having issues in the facility that he's in. He's kept in this horrible facility in London, or I don't know if it's in the city, but like something horrible.
Right.
And this is not good.
So we're going to keep up the fight. And
yeah. So this is the thing. We need a link ASAP. We need this on our website. So we're working on this, and
yeah, we're definitely here to help Nina Turner get.
Yeah. So our goal is going to, we need Nina Turner. So
yeah, that's
really it. So everybody, if you have not gone on to support Nina Turner, please do so. Please be a contributor to her campaign. And that's really all I want to say about that.
We appreciate you all coming on today. Like I said, On the Ground podcast tomorrow night, Jen will be on. So make sure you check it out, and we will see you guys.
Is that on YouTube?
It is on YouTube.
Okay.
Yep.
I'll be there.
See you guys on Monday.
Peace out.